Can you please tell me what's going on here?
Sure. This is a commemoration today of a day of action, a day of solidarity, which has been called by activists across the country, anti-racist, anti-fascist activists specifically, who are facing a wave of white nationalist marches in various places. We saw it in Charlottesville, and today there's one scheduled for Berkeley, California. And so the day of action for today is actually in connection to a call that came from Berkeley to ask for acts of solidarity, and that's what we're doing here in Fairport today.
What's happening in Berkeley?
In Berkeley, the far right, a bunch of Nazi groups had a permit to march, and so they were going to try to march on the streets, I believe.
I'm surprised some places as open as Berkeley would allow that.
For some reason, Berkeley, well, because of its openness, has become sort of a magnet of the far right, or like they call themselves, the alt-right these days. And so for various reasons, Berkeley and even other big liberal sort of colleges like Columbia and New York City or other places are a place where these right-wing speakers try to schedule events and therefore become the focal point of struggles around it.
Do you think any of the students in those take those marches seriously, or do they just mock them and make fun of them and ignore them?
I live in Georgia too.
I think the seriousness of right-wing speakers aren't really a problem. I mean, fascist marching in the streets are a problem because that is an act of intimidation. They do that in order to show that their strength is such that they can control the streets. They can bully people into not showing their faces. And so when fascists try to do that, as they did in Charlottesville, then movements have to step up to stop them.
I want to thank DSA, Metro Justice, Black Rose for collaborating on us with this rally. You know, when white supremacists show their heads in places like Charlottesville, Boston, Berkeley, etc., we want to respond the same way every single time. We come out with the broadest coalition possible, our side vastly outweighing theirs, and we let them know that under no circumstances will their views of hatred, bigotry, and violence be tolerated. Just last week, white supremacists attempted to organize a march in Boston, and we embarrassed them by coming out so strong that they were forced to retreat with their tails between their legs. They think that after their display in Charlottesville, they can make some political gains in the time of Trump. Not only are they dead wrong, but they underestimated our vigor. Right. This is together, as a left, socialist, DSA, Black Rose, Metro Justice, we will stand together in solidarity against hatred and against violence. Not just with hugs and kisses, but with organization, clear goals, and education. This is how we win, and this is how we've always won. In numbers, in solidarity, against instances of hatred, bigotry, and injustice.
It's not about going to a rally and then going home. It is about constantly fighting for a better world and showing up wherever and whenever possible as part of a united front to demoralize fascists, white supremacists, Nazis, racists of all shapes and sizes, to say you are not welcome here.
Fascism is what's left when the system is in crisis and the mask of civil, pluralistic, liberal democracy slips. Working people live every day with the subtle imposition of gender, racial, and religious hierarchy that privileges straight, white, Christian, cis males above everybody else. Meanwhile, we're all told a story about how we're equal and we share in the opportunity of this great system together. But the contradiction between the story we're told and the lived reality can only be maintained in periods of relative social calm and prosperity. When the system can no longer keep up the appearance of prosperity, this failure begins to impact the parts of the population that are used to having the system work for them. This is when the fascism lying at the bottom of it all begins to surface. This is when the prejudices that are usually politely ignored begin to be weaponized to deflect socially privileged people's anger at their own alienation. That anger is diverted away from the cause of that alienation and aimed at people who are most vulnerable, who then become scapegoats. What we are seeing is capitalism at low tide. The rotting garbage at the floor is now being exposed. We have to remember that capitalism relies on fascism as a check against the coming together of exploited people. And the only way to win against fascism is to attack the system that relies on it to do its dirty work.
Nazis are not welcome here.
Nazis are not welcome here. Nazis are not welcome here.
Anti-Semitism is caused by Zionism.
I don't think it's caused by Zionism. I just don't think a sort of Jewish exclusive nationalism that's exclusively Jewish is the right response to anti-Semitism. I think just the right response is to just stick up for inclusive societies that no matter what your heritage is, you are accepted and embraced. I think that's the answer. Then sort of creating this society where if you're not Jewish, you're considered the enemy, you're considered a demographic threat, you're considered a danger, and you need to be limited. So I don't think it's the reason. I just don't think it's, I don't think it's a good way to respond, and as a Jewish person, I wouldn't want to be treated the way non-Jewish people are treated in Israel as I'm living in the diaspora.
How do you think they should handle the Palestinians in Israel? How do you think the best solution?
Well, I think they should make it a one state that's where everyone is equal. Everyone is equal. I mean, I have several relatives living in Israel. Of course I don't want harm to come to them. But I want it to be an equal state where whether you're Jewish or Palestinian, you have equal rights to housing, equal rights to water, equal rights to education, where there's not all this discrimination towards those who aren't Jewish. As far as the refugees, I mean, I personally don't see why they have less right to live there than me as a Jew who never set foot there.
What do you mean by the refugees?
Oh, the Palestinian refugees.
Oh.
Yeah, who are demanding to be able to return to their villages. I don't see why I have more right to live there than they do. To me, I should have the right to live there. There should be a state where Jewish people can feel safe and go to. But that doesn't negate their right to live there.
Do you think if they allowed the Palestinians to live there, the problems with attacks would stop or be reduced, I should say?
Well, I think that it's in stages. I don't think if initially you can have all the Palestinians come back. Probably they wouldn't want to come back. But if you start out by saying this is a state for all the people living here, it's not a Jewish state, it's a state for all the people living here, and outlaw all these policies that privilege Jewish people at the expense of other people who aren't Jewish and deny them equal access to housing, basic things like housing, that would be a start. And if you force them to live as equals together, that would be a start. I think about South Africa, and yes, there's economically it's still very segregated, but politically, there's an African American government. They did not kill off all the whites, even though the government is black. Even though the government is the group that was segregated and severely discriminated against. They're in political power, even though economically the whites are in political power, and they still are very marginalized, and that needs to change. But just because they took political power does not mean that the whites are getting killed off. And I think with Israel, I mean, just because Palestinians have equality does not mean an end to Jews. I mean, you can have, it's not a zero-sum game. You can have it where both groups have equality. And I don't think you should make it into a thing of either Jews have Jewish privilege at the expense of these people, and there's not equality, or Jews get killed.
Not really. I'm part of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. I live in Fairport, so coming out to this march and having all this anti-fascist people here was really important to me, because this is my hometown, and I want people to know that this is what matters to us. This is what we believe.
How is a democratic socialist different from a regular Democrat?
Democratic socialism, well, Democrat is obviously a large part of it. Democratic Socialists started in the 90s, and they're an organization like the International Socialist Organization. They're more focused on socialism. The difference is, I can't speak for ISO, but the reason we call ourselves Democratic Socialism, or Democratic Socialists, is because everything is democratic. All the decisions we make as an organization are democratic, are voted on.
I get it.
So, and it's to have a left group that just focus on both doing things democratically and socialist things like healthcare for all that sort of stuff.
And universal education?
Yeah.
How do you differ from the anarchists?
Different from anarchists? Well, because we're democratic socialists, we are a political party. I mean, well, we also do direct action. We're also involved in electoral politics, at least a little bit.
Get it? So anarchists would not be involved in politics. They'd just be in direct actions.
Yeah, typically their anarchy is less focused around voting and elections and direct actions that help people. And to be honest, personally, I'm not speaking for the DSA when I say this. Personally, I very much approve of what anarchists do. I think in my personal history, I've walked the line between democratic socialism and anarchism a lot. And I support both groups in the way they do things.
My name is Rachel Rosen-Simpson. I am a member of RAC DSA, and although I would identify as many things, I feel it particularly important to share my identities as a bisexual who is an agnostic Unitarian Jew. Until recently, I've rarely felt compelled to share those descriptors because it's usually unnecessary, and I have been extremely privileged in this community to not need to worry about it or give it a second thought. But in the last few months, I've become increasingly frightened of sharing those descriptors, which I realize is nothing new for my many brothers and sisters of color and those in the LGBTQ community who confront white supremacy daily. I've decided that now it's even more important for me to be courageous enough for open self-identification, because I know I am not alone. And allowing my fears to isolate me from all of you is effectively giving away my power. It may surprise you that I'm not opposed to letting the Nazis openly identify themselves too. But by that I mean, let them come out of the woodwork and show their true colors. It allows us an unprecedented opportunity to unify as the majority I know we are. Against a common foe that is now both visible and specific. The ideologies of hatred and bigotry, like an infected wound, can only be healed by drawing all the pus to the surface. And then we can work together to fully clear it out.
To ensure success, the most crucial aspect of this work requires each of us to make a simple but profoundly important choice. One that encompasses whether to make this miserable situation better or worse, and eclipses all other minutiae over which progressive people often tend to argue. Do I exist to support others or to oppose others?
Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter.